David, firstly, what's wrong with our state governments? Can't they just ban the protests planned for tomorrow?
Well, you're absolutely right in your introduction, Chris. You can't have one law for one lot of people and another law for everybody else. If you take the series of events that have happened, transpired in Victoria, we currently have a situation where our state is under a state of emergency. We've had the toughest laws in any other state in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been the last to relax any of those laws. People haven't been able to visit a loved one, play golf, fish, even take a 17-year-old for a driving lesson, which we had mother and a daughter fined for that. So we've had a series of these things. And now the Premier came out earlier in the week and said that he wasn't going to fine people for attending a protest. We now have a situation on our hands. 80,000 people, more than an MCG football game, are planned to attend a protest tomorrow. And the Premier's scrambling, trying to find out how he's going to handle it. I mean, this is an absolute mess, absolute mess.
This is the problem for those of us who are not protesters, who don't want to protest. We see that the police have simply enforced the law up until now. They've stopped people going to St Kilda Beach. You've mentioned some other examples. They've stopped people around the country having funerals, having weddings. Sure. Yet here, what's the problem with just enforcing the law? Crowd gatherings are barred. So why won't the police stop a protest?
Well, the ironic thing is we've been told earlier in the week that people can't return to their workplace in the city and they have to continue to work from home. Yet we're going to have tomorrow up to 80,000 people in the city and the police have been left to do the government's dirty work. I feel really sorry for the members of Victoria Police that were told earlier on the week that there wasn't going to be fines imposed. There hasn't been certainly any leadership from Daniel Andrews. And, you know, this is an absolute mess. The fact that people were told that they weren't going to be fined, it sends a very clear message that it's okay to turn up. And if that's okay, then what about the consequences if we do get a second wave, if you do have the violence? We were told this morning that there is potential violence earmarked for this protest, including people spitting on police officers. Well, what is this all about? How is this fair and how is this safe? You know, the Premier has got a lot to answer for, and certainly if there is violence tomorrow, if there is any outbreaks because of absolutely no social distancing, then the Premier's got effectively all of these problems to answer for on his hands.
Well, the police, though, have reaffirmed that message about fines today. They said they would only fine the organisers after the event if they think that social distancing hasn't been observed. So that hardly dissuades anyone from turning up.
No, and as we heard, you know, from the Premier and the Police Minister earlier in the week, that they weren't fining people for turning up. You can have, if you had 21 people turn up to any of the businesses in the CBD, the business owner could be fined up to $10,000, you know, for 21 people in a cafe, whereas it's okay to have 80,000 people on the streets. Look, while the cause is very important, and I absolutely get that, while people's right to protest is important, you've got to have consistency. People have been denied the right to say goodbye to a loved one, to bury somebody at a funeral, to have a wedding, all of these things, and that's fair enough, but you've got to have consistency. How can any of this be fair?
Well, this is the problem, is the lack of consistency, and it's also the hiding behind medical officers or hiding behind police commissioners instead of politicians taking responsibility for the balancing act that they are employed to deliver. But let's look at it around the other way. When you talk about consistency, I would say that Victoria has been too slow in lifting restrictions. I would say it's time that people should be able to get back out into the parks and the beaches and into the footy and sporting stadiums. Doesn't this demonstrate the case? If they're going to let the protests go ahead tomorrow, shouldn't they start easing off on the other restrictions and letting people turn up at the MCG and go and watch the footy?
Well, Chris, that's a very, very good question. There's also another question to be had. If people aren't going to be fined tomorrow, are police going to continue to enforce fines beyond tomorrow to those that don't meet up with the laws that we have in place? And I would question that because, you know, again, on the consistency measure, we've got to kind of get back to fairness on all of this. And you're right. I feel sorry for those small businesses at the moment that are absolutely struggling. Many of our businesses in Victoria, a cafe can't open with 20 people. You know, many of those have had to resort to still takeaway because they can't open. You've got businesses struggling. You've got people struggling with their jobs. really it is now time to restart Victoria. We used to be the state of cheap energy, of manufacturing, of jobs. Well, there's none of that at the moment. We're the state of protest. That's what we are. We're the state of protest, and we're the state of ideology that supersedes fairness and having a go and hard work. That's all been thrown out the window.
Well, that's the argument to run, isn't it? Sure, point out the inconsistency here, the one law for the mainstream and another law for protesters, but use that as leverage to get the government to actually lift the restrictions. If people can protest, surely they can go to the footy.
Well, you would think so. Again, 80,000 people to march in the streets, yet you can't have a footy game, and many of those footy games wouldn't have 80,000 people in them. So, they will be questions that we will certainly ask going forward with all of this.
Certainly not when your rubbish Victorian teams are playing anyway. But
oh well, I'm a Saints supporter, so we don't have much. We don't have much joy. I tell you, we don't at all.
Well, as a Crows supporter, you're one of the few teams we've got some good memories about. But we better move on. Thanks for joining us, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. Pleasure. Have a good night.
David Southwick there. A couple of things I want to mention off the back of that. One is just think about all those people. You'll know some of them who haven't been able to go to funerals, who haven't been able to cross the border to catch up with loved ones, who have postponed weddings or had little weddings when they wanted all their friends around. They've paid that human price for all of this coronavirus lockdown, and then the politicians, the protesters, they do whatever they please. The second point I would make is when it comes to sport, breaking news just in the last half hour or so, the NRL are saying they're going to get crowds, small at first, but they're going to get spectators back into rugby league games starting this Thursday. So that is good news, starting to get people back into the stands so that they can enjoy this sport. Let's hope that catches on around the country. Let's cross to London now, where some of these same issues have been playing out. I'm joined as ever by the editor of